this weak vowel system then that operates in certain unstressed syllables. Fewer vowels distinguished than the strong system. Well, one thing that clearly belongs here is this vowel at the end of words like happy, which we discussed briefly in the initial lecture, where we saw that some speakers used something like the I of bit, happy. Others use something like the E of beat, happy. Others may fluctuate between these two, or indeed use something intermediate in quality between them, because it really doesn't matter. In this weak position, there is no contrast. E-I, the beat-bit contrast, belongs in the strong vowel system. It doesn't apply in the weak vowel system. We find this neutralization to I at the ends of words like happy, very, sorry, coffee, valley, donkey, but also before another vowel in words like radiate. Now, is it radiate or is it radiate? Really a meaningless question. It's neither one nor the other. It's the weak vowel that corresponds to both of them. Radiate. And they're the opposition of long versus short. E versus I doesn't apply. This is also what we have, in fact, in my view, in words like various. Potentially, at any rate, this word has 3 syllables. Various. And the second vowel is this I of happy, followed by a schwa, followed by another vowel. Various. And this is not, therefore, the ordinary diphthong ear like in near. But if we have to identify what this I is, it's a meaningless question to be forced to choose between the I of bit and the E of beat, because there's no distinction. We have a corresponding neutralization with the back vowels U and U. Different vowels in foot on the one hand and shoot on the other, yes. But at the end of thank you, it's really meaningless to ask which it is. We don't say thank you with a strong U like if you're saying the word in isolation. Is it to be identified with the oo of food or with the o of good? I don't know. People often transcribe it with a symbol like the o of good, but it isn't really the strong o that you get from good. It's a weak equivalent. Thank you. And we get this again before another vowel in a word like situation that we've got on the handout. Again, Daniel Jones would have shown this as being a short o like in good, but that's slightly misleading. It isn't really that. It can be just as tense as an oo, but shorter situation. So we've got those 2 weak vowels, an I and an oo. Third, most obviously, we've got the schwa, the examples on the handout: common, second syllable there; better, allow, first syllable, and allow. Well, you know about this. It is, of course, quite difficult to demonstrate in phonemic terms that there is an opposition between schwa and the a of love. Basically, you get the a of love in stressed syllables and the in other syllables. So you can't demonstrate that they're in contrast in the same syllable. Well, in fact, you can show it. We can speak of a large untidy room where untidy, we choose not to accent the and that's different then from a large and tidy room, which is large and tidy, where is the weak form of and. So we're distinguishing between and but there are very few pairs like that. However, once we recognise they belong in different systems, and it's a matter of identifying whether the syllable is strong or weak, then things rather fall into place. I would claim then that just as me has a strong form, me, you has a strong form, you, and her has a strong form, her, so we have weak forms involving the weak. Tell me. I'll tell you. And the schwa, I'll tell her. And these are absolutely parallel to one another. Now, we commonly recognise the third one because everybody recognises schwa as a separate vowel, but it seems to me there's just as much a case for recognising the weak I and the weak U, because they function in just the same way. We have, however, got two further weak vowels, which are clearly none of those, at least in accents similar to received pronunciation. Now, arguably in some other accents of English, including Australian and many American accents, we don't have any more weak vowels. But clearly we do in RP because of what happens in the plural of a word like horse, which is horses. Now, Australians say horses with a schwa, and so we need to account for this fact. And similarly, in many, many other words, we have a weak I, we have an I in the system. This, after all, is what we have in democracy, if we say democracy. Okay, there are other varieties of English that say democracy, even some RP speakers do that, so it's all a bit of a grey area. But if we want to recognise I as a vowel that results from weakening, which we do, then we've got to add it to the system. So I've given you here the words horses and related as typical examples where we may find I as a weak vowel, in related. Even more strangely, in received pronunciation, but in perhaps rather few other accents, we have a weak O that seems to need to be distinguished. In words like stimulus. Now again, Americans and Australians will generally say stimulus with a schwa, stimulus. Similarly, in executive, which isn't necessarily executive. This is rather awkward. It means we've got to recognise that this I and O belong to both strong and weak systems. And they constitute a kind of overlap between the two different systems. This, I think, is why it, for example, seems to have no weak form. The strong form is it. When you say, I'll get it, it seems to have the same weak form. Well, probably what's happening is we're going from strong I in a strong form to weak I in a weak form, but they sound the same. So we can distinguish them theoretically, but it's just that there's a phonetic overlap between these, because at this point the strong and weak vowel systems overlap. I don't know if that just seems too sophisticated and unnecessarily complicated, but that does explain perhaps why we don't in RP have a weak form of it, whereas interestingly enough the Australians do. The Australians who have no weak I weaken the pronoun, so it's got a strong form it and a weak form ut, and they say I'll get it. I'll get it, for where we say, I'll get it. And that is exactly what you would predict if the Australians have no weak I. But we do. Well, that's great fun.